how to organize a library of papers. I think that this is an age-long question in the research community, and I have yet to find somebody that actually has a solution that works perfectly and that they are completely satisfied with. So I figured that since I also don't have a solution that is perfect, I might just chip in my way to structure the papers and to organize my research so that hopefully humanity can go on in this quest for the perfect way to organize papers and to do research without too much hustle. So hello there, it is Julia. I'm a PhD in computer science and I have been collecting a lot of papers and I've been trying to organize them in a decent way. So I found a way that kind of works for me, but I would like to foster discussion in the comments if you have a better way, if you found tools that work better for you, and I hope this will be useful for you to maybe have some inspiration on how to collect papers and organize them in a good way for your research. So let's jump in my computer and I will show you how I organize papers and note-taking. Okay, here we are. So the goal of today's video is to just have a look at the way in which I organize my papers, because if you are doing research or if you're studying computer science or any kind of subject really, at some point you're probably going to have a lot of papers, a lot of material that you need to organize. How do you do it in a way that does not actually make you more confused than it is necessary, especially when you need to find something quickly? The first question when you start to have a significant number of papers that comes to my mind and that was bugging me for a long time was how to actually classify them when I find a paper that might be interesting. And the moment I decide why it is interesting for me, how can I access it when I need it? And this is a stratified problem because it is in the first place a classification problem. So the moment I find a new paper that I still didn't actually digest, how do I know where to place it? And then second thing, once I elaborate the paper and once I know why it is going to be useful for me, how can I find it quickly? I will show you the problem of organizing your knowledge is a difficult problem. It's not only related to papers, it's also related to notes that you produce. But in this specific setup, we're going to be focusing on paper reading, for example. And for example, my problem is that the moment I find papers, they're probably gonna be in my mind just classified by topic, because maybe I find a paper in a conference that talks about edge computing. But in reality, the fact is that I might be using for my own research papers that come from a variety of different fields, maybe one because it talks about a particular way to do experiments and comes from a different field. Another time it might be a paper that examines an application that I am going to be using to implement my system. So it's not actually a one-on-one mapping from the field you found it in the first place to the research project that you're going to be using it for. So let's see how I actually structure my projects. Basically, I do everything based on the file system. I have this Obsidian vault that is called my notes vault, which is where I write my own notes on the papers. This is the PhD area. I'm going to be going a bit more in depth on the way I structure my notes in Obsidian in a later video. This is where I take the notes related to the papers and the topics that I'm interested in. For example, a collection of my favorite papers, a collection of papers related to different topics that I'm working on right now. And within this Obsidian vault, there is actually also a library folder that is where I save all the papers that I find online. And they are kind of classified by topic. So this is applications, it might be autonomous driving, gaming, IoT, medical, machine learning, deep learning, space, video processing, things like that. Or it can be books, so just full books of hundreds of pages that I take separately and do not really classify by topic because I don't have many of them. And the further you go within a folder, directory, the more specific the topic gets. And it can be CMU because it's all the papers that come from a university, or it can be a topic, file systems, for example. And here are all the papers related to file system research that I read. So this is the first level of classification that I use. Sometimes when it's usually only the broad topics, so it might be networking, it might be operating systems, it might be storage, virtualization, what have you. But for some topics where I am particularly interested and I have a lot of papers to read, I also classify by conference. So for example, inside this folder, there would be all the proceedings of the Hot Operating Systems Conference 2021. And this I know for sure that is going to be, broadly speaking, within within the operating system field. I read all of them, so I try to keep them all together for the notes. But some other times I don't necessarily stratify and classify by conference, because I hardly ever read all the proceedings of a single conference. So I just try to give a first-hand skimming of the paper topic and then put it in the folder that I created and that makes the most sense to me. But the problem is that after you do this kind of step, the paper might not necessarily be useful to you for the topic of operating systems. Maybe you find the paper particularly useful for your research in edge computing, which comes from the operating systems realm. And at that point, the link is not necessarily the library classification, it's more like an association that is not represented in this structure, in this tree of directories that I have set up here. And so how do you find this paper, for example, course the doc that don't count, in the right place if it is not actually related to operating systems the moment you are using it for research? Well, what I do is basically to create a meta level of information using files in Obsidian, for example. So here we are in my paper reading notes. When I read new papers or conference proceedings like Hot Edge, EdSys proceedings, what have you, I create a proceedings page, and every paper that I read and annotate will have one note, let's say this one, where I put my own notes, and I could here use the tags. So for example, if this paper is relevant for the experiment, I could use the experiments tag here, and maybe it's useful for a research in edge computing for me, and so I put the tag edge here in these notes. This is the link to the PDF that I showed you earlier. I can do it because it is in the same Obsidian vault, so whenever I need to cite a paper, I can just double bracket and find the PDF here in the right classification, and I'm gonna have the link here, so the moment I highlight the text, I also have it right away. But once again, as I said, it might not necessarily be useful for you just related to the operating systems area. So this is why I use tags here, so that the moment I need to access all the papers that relate to edge computing, I can either search for the tag here, for the tag edge, and it's gonna show up here, or if I'm brave, I can look for it here in the graph view, which I don't find particularly useful in this scenario in particular. But it's easier to look for and to index in a way that is more semantic rather than hierarchical and based on directories and broad areas which don't necessarily reflect the research project that you're working on. So yeah, all in all, this is the way I structure papers. I don't really use applications like Mendeley or Zotero. I know that they are very useful to other people. I don't find them really fitting for my own use case, because in general, I really do not like to depend on an application to do something. This is only files, the ones in Obsidian, so I can move away from this one and just look for another application if I want to change it. So I prefer to be platform independent, but the one thing that I do use Mendeley for is to generate a bibtex file, bibtex, so that when I write papers, I already have the citation in the right format. But I basically only use this to create automatically the citations file and not really to reflect any of my note-taking, my tagging, and my classification efforts. But nonetheless, this Mendeley folder is also synchronized on the library folder that is on the Obsidian Vault, within the Obsidian Vault. So basically everything is consistent and is always up to date across all my devices. Another thing that might be useful for you to have is just to have fast access to a file the moment you think about it and just want to check it quickly, and you don't necessarily want to go all the way to within the Obsidian Vault and what have you, and look for the paper here in the paper reading notes and the ship compute to storage and what have you here. This is a long word. Maybe you just want to quickly open course that don't count and you remember the title. Well, this is where I usually try to give names that are explicit. So the moment you download a paper from online, it's usually just a string of numbers that don't really mean anything, and it's gonna make it hard for you to find it right away. But you can, if you save it with a good file name, you can also just use the file systems research. So here, if I look for course that don't count, it's gonna be here right away, and I can just access it quickly directory without the Obsidian access directory, just simply by having an explicit and verbose file name that indicates something. I'm trying to find a way to embed other types of tags within the title. So for example, here I saved the title with HotOS 21, so I could also look for that one in the file system and have here all the HotOS 21 proceedings. But probably I will experiment adding some tags within the file name here. So also maybe if it's relevant for edge computing, I might modify the file name and also have that indicated. Still didn't experiment how that would work, but I think it might be interesting to try, because I do remember the names of the papers and maybe why that would be useful, and it would be easy to have access to that also through the file system without necessarily having to use the tags here within Obsidian or any other kind of text-based search. I hope this was useful for you, and if you have any other way that helps you to organize your knowledge and your papers, I would be very happy to hear about it in the comments. And this was the end of today's video. Thanks for watching. Okay, this was the end of today's video. I hope it was useful for you. I think that there is no one way that will fit everybody, no silver bullet for paper organization. And a lot, I believe, depends on the way your mind even connects concepts. Maybe you prefer a library, maybe you prefer a graph of knowledge or what have you. And depending on the way in which your mind prefers to work, one way will be preferable towards the other. But, everybody can share inspiration, and hopefully everyone will find what suits them. And one day, humanity and the whole research community will have a good way to organize paper reading that will not take everybody like months to set up before starting to feel satisfied with the process. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like the content that I produced, maybe consider subscribing. And I will see you again next week. Bye.